Good morning to all of you and welcome to the EEB's 2020 annual conference. Our EEB president, Johanna Sandal, is going to open the conference. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patricia. Dear friends, it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the EEB annual conference. My name is Johanna Sandal and I am the president of the EEB. 32 years ago, about a third of a century ago, in the year 1988, thousands of dead seals floated ashore the coast of Sweden. The Great Seal Death had struck the Baltic Sea and the environmental debate was a fact. And in the parliamentary election that year, the Green Party entered the Swedish parliament for the first time. I was 14 years old and very worried and upset about the death of the seals and a lot of other things had happened around me. Only 2 years earlier, two major events had shaken Sweden. Prime Minister Olof Palme had been shot dead in the open, and only a few months later, the serious reactor accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant took place, after which radioactive particles spread to large parts of Sweden and other parts of Europe. George H.W. Bush won the US election, and during his presidency, the Kuwait War would dominate much of the news reporting. In 1988, the EEB had been fighting for environmental issues for 14 years, but it wasn't until now or then that the European Council conclusions for the first time mentioned sustainable development. Only a few years later, things looked a bit brighter. George H.W. Bush and Boris Yeltsin formally declared that the Cold War was over. The Berlin Wall had been torn down. The Velvet Revolution had overthrown the dictatorship in Czechoslovakia, and the Baltic countries had become independent states. From an idea that originally came from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, the world's first carbon dioxide tax had been introduced in Sweden. After 20 years of hard work, the white-tailed eagle was no longer threatened, and the lynx had been protected. And not the least, in Rio de Janeiro, the world's nations gathered for the United Nations Conference on Environmental Development, the Earth Summit. And I remember that I was thinking, it's happening now. We can change the world. But 32 years later, I think it's relevant to ask yourself if it was really then it happened. Well, in a way, it was not. All the nice words, visions, and goals that were the result of the Rio conference have in fact not become reality. But seen from another perspective, it was then it happened. It was one big event, together with other big and small events, that contributed to the beginning of a change. Just as the small and big actions that happen today around Europe and the rest of the world together makes a big difference. The thought of it's happening now gives me a lot of energy. And today, I'm absolutely convinced that it is now it's happening. The world is changing. 93% of EU citizens see climate change as a serious problem. The knowledge about biodiversity and the willingness to protect it is growing constantly. People's awareness about the problems our lifestyles are causing is growing stronger and stronger. When the World Economic Forum compiles the most serious global risks to society, the list is dominated by environmental problems, such as extreme weather events, natural disasters, biodiversity loss, and the collapse of ecosystems. The insight is there, but also the power of action. The world's nations have agreed on the Paris Agreement. Agenda 2030, with its 17 global goals, has been established. And in city after city and country after country, plans are being developed to make sure the agenda becomes a reality. Even in EU politics, or one can say especially in EU politics, there's clearly something going on. With the European Green Deal, the possibility to meet the great challenges we face is far better than just a few years ago. And the fact that the commitment to the Green Deal seems to have held through the pandemic, morphing into an insistence on a green recovery, is to be welcomed. But of course, a lot needs to happen. Fine words and ideas that we can find in the European Green Deal need to be turned into very specific and concrete policies in many different areas. So far, almost 1 year on, we've seen some positive results with the biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the chemical strategy for sustainability, whereas the farm to fork strategy and the circular economy action plan 2.0 have been of mixed quality, and the industry strategy and climate law proposals have been disappointing. Of particular concern is the direction of the CAP negotiations, which is out of line with the EGD objectives. We're still missing a sustainable development strategy for the EU in line with the 2030 agenda to serve as the compass for environmental, social, and economic policies, as well as governance. The gap between the rich and the poor in the EU is widening. More and more people do not earn enough to make a living. Minorities and migrants often live at the margins of our societies. And according to Eurostat, the EU is falling behind in achieving, for example, SDG 5 on gender equality. There is much work to do, and we will hear in the coming hours many ideas on what the priorities should be. While our particular focus is on European policies, Europe does not exist in a vacuum. A sustainable Europe, if such could be achieved, would mean little in an unsustainable world. Collaboration with countries outside of Europe and success in international negotiations, such as the climate and biodiversity negotiations, is of crucial importance. While the dust has yet to settle on the US election, a likely inauguration of President Biden in January suggests that the worst has been avoided and that the world's richest economy will no longer be led by a climate-denying president. These challenges strengthen my strong belief in the incredible importance of the civil society and the environmental movement. What an important force we are for the environmental and societal transition to really happen. Our knowledge about the challenges we face is broad and deep. We've got the ability to see solutions to problems. We have the strength to point out what needs to be done from Greece in the south to Norway in the north, and from Ireland in the west to Georgia in the east. A force that strengthens and defends the democracy that is so important for us to change the world. And now we gather here at this year's annual conference and the EP's annual general meeting. Our way of meeting is very different this time. And while I would have loved to meet you all in person instead of virtually, I still look very much forward to these days with many interesting perspectives and discussions. It's my greatest wish that when we leave the conference today, or for some of us the meeting tomorrow, we do so with a feeling that we together can make sure that it's happening now. The world is changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for putting us in the right frame of mind for the EB's 2020 annual conference, and good morning again to all of you. The European Environmental Bureau brings together citizens' organizations from all across Europe. Together with our 160 member organizations in 36 countries, we work on a very broad range of environmental issues. We speak up for people and nature to help shape policies for a sustainable future. I'm Patricia Heidegger, and I'll be one of your co-moderators this morning. Just a little bit less than 1 year ago, the European Commission revealed the details of the European Green Deal in December last year. And we invite you today to discuss with us how we can rise from the ashes of the pandemic to an ever greener deal and secure Europe's environmental leadership. We would like to reflect with you, after this first year of the European Green Deal, how the disruptions caused by the pandemic can and must be used to accelerate the green transition towards true sustainability. This is our window of opportunity to make the necessary change happen right now. Let me ask my co-moderator, Patrick ten Brink, to tell us what's on the program this morning and what we're going to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Right, I'm Patrick ten Brink of the European Environmental Bureau. I wanted to first say about the red thread of the whole day and then the agenda. So what we're trying to do is to do a bit of a test 1 year in on the European Green Deal. Okay, so some of you will have already seen in your invitations, we've developed a background report paper for this, looking at what we think has gone well, what we think has not gone so well, and what we think has gone poorly, as well as creating a bit of a vision for the future as to what's needed for this to be a success. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, when she was voted for in the Parliament, was voted for on the grounds of her agenda and her program. The number one issue there was the Green Deal. So the success of the Green Deal is linked to the success of the Commission. So what we want to do today is to explore what's worked, what hasn't worked, and more importantly, what is the vision for the future. And so what we'll start off with the first keynote speaker, with Kate Raworth, who is internationally known as not only the donut economics, but a visionary. So we developed the big picture. What do we need to tackle? What do we need to address if the Green Deal is going to be a success? Then we moved on to a conversation with the Commissioner Sinkevicius, who's one of the key architects of the Green Deal, and our Secretary General, Jeremy Waits, to explore the issues of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and the way forward. And then we move one step in to the stakeholder perspectives, where we have 5 stakeholders. We have Florica Finke-Huijer of the GG of the European Commission, Leonor Gewessler, the Minister of the Environment in Austria, Pascal Canfin, the Chair of the Environment Committee of the European Parliament, Anna Kolovic-Lesowska, Civil Society and a prize winner, and Tony Nosvin, who is a youth representative. So together with all of that, we should be able to create a beautiful picture from the different angles of what we need for the Green Deal to work in Europe and allow us to have a leadership contributing our bit to the planet. So back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Indeed, an exciting program for this morning, and I'm looking forward to learning more from all our speakers this morning. So how can you interact with us during the discussions? For each session, you will see a question and answer box. So please share your questions with us. Also use the poll function. The results will feed into our discussion. And last but not least, please share your thoughts and comments with us on Twitter, #EB20. And now I will not make you wait very much longer. I'm handing over to Patrick to kick off the first session with Kate.
Okay, thank you again. So I'd like to introduce Kate Raworth. She's known for her donut economics, and the key thing is she defines a little bit the safe operating space, and she wants to lead us into it. So without a little more ado, I'll hand over to Kate Raworth, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join all of you. Really important conference that we're going to have, and a discussion in a very critical moment, a very critical Monday morning for the world, I think, given the results of the US election. It definitely means that possibilities are opening that otherwise would have been closed. So let's see how that looks from a perspective of Europe. So I want to share some slides this morning so that I can tell the story together with those slides. I can't yet see those slides. If they could be made visible for me, that would be excellent. Thank you. So, Europe's Green Deal. First of all, I have to just acknowledge that I am a British citizen, and I am extremely sorry and devastated that my country is on the outside of this. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm someone seeing what's happening in the European region, and I congratulate Europe on moving forward in a way that no other region has started to do. But will this Green Deal be harnessed for the transformation that we already knew was needed? Or will it be hijacked by vested interests and business as usual? That, of course, has to be a critical question. So I want to start just by pulling right back by looking at the big picture of where we are in these days of the 21st century. Because this century has begun with repeated crises. 2008 gave us financial meltdown. We are living in an era of climate and ecological breakdown. And now countries around the world, across Europe and everywhere, are enduring COVID lockdown. And these crises emerge from the very systems that we've been creating. They emerge from the endless expansionism of human systems, whether it's the endless expansion of the financial system, the endless expansion of humanity's use of energy and fossil resources, or indeed humanity's travel and expansion into wild areas. Our strategy of endlessly expanding means that there are boomerang effects that hit back on us and undermine the very sources of our well-being. And so we need to reimagine what prosperity looks like. And so for this, I offer you a donut. Imagine humanity's well-being thriving in that green circle, leaving no one falling short on the essentials of life without the food and water, healthcare, political voice, housing that every person has a claim to, but also not overshooting that ecological ceiling, the 9 planetary boundaries that are Earth's life-supporting systems that make this the one habitable planet that we know of in the entire universe. So we need to find a balance where we can meet the needs of all people within the means of this living planet. But if balance is where we want to get to, we're very far from that now. If we go through, keep going to the next, we'll see we are in massive overshoot, falling short on meeting people's essential needs. We need to eliminate all of the red from the middle of that picture so that no person worldwide is left falling short on the essentials of life. But we have to do that globally in a context where we are already overshooting multiple planetary boundaries. We know we are in overshoot on climate change, but also on fertilizer use, on land conversion, on catastrophic levels of biodiversity loss that are breaking down the web of life. This is a global picture of humanity as a whole, but at the national level, we can see the story is very different for very different countries. So on the left-hand side, you have Rwanda, very strongly falling short on meeting its people's needs, but without overshooting any of those planetary boundaries. In the middle, we have China, both falling short significantly on meeting people's needs, but already overshooting planetary boundaries. And then on the far right, we have Australia. Relative to most countries in the world, it is meeting people's needs. This is a low global social bar, but it is massively an overshoot on its impact on planetary boundaries. And if we want to see where Europe is, well, yes, Europe, like Australia, is almost meeting its people's needs and massively in overshoot. By the way, this is the story for all high-income countries, because that ecological overshoot is not just the resources used within the land mass of Europe or Australia or the United States. It's the consumption-based use of the world's material footprint, fossil fuel emissions, water, land, the worldwide consumption, and it has to come back within. This is our generational challenge, to transform this. Now, if we take a look at 150 countries worldwide, all on this scatter plot, the sweet spot is that top left-hand corner, where we meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And for me, this just tells us that we are all developing countries now. I have never encountered a single country in the world that can say, we're developed. Because there is no country that on this 21st century vision of what it means to be developed and have prosperity, no country is close. Every country needs an unprecedented transformation. And that means we need a phenomenal humility and unparalleled ambition. Now, Europe within this story is in the high income, high overshoot countries, all of those red dots that I've picked out. And of course, Europe has put forward the Green Deal. To me, the Green Deal's test is it going to bring Europe into that sweet spot that Europe is meeting the needs of all of its people within the means of planetary boundaries? And so the European Green Deal, it's been in practice for 1 year. We know it has a diversity of ambitions. It brings social transition and just transition in alongside a transformative green agenda. But what does it actually look like in practice? Will it be harnessed for the transformation we already knew was needed? Or will it be hijacked by interests that are long-standing and that will try to undermine transformation because it doesn't serve their vested needs? So I want to look at this from 3 perspectives. The vision and the leadership that's set out, which inspires and is set in words and in speeches and in text. What does that look like when it then comes down to the specifics of the target set and the strategy? And then when we get really serious, when the rubber hits the road, as they say, when we get down to the action, what does it look like when it's translated into legislation and finance? Follow the law and follow the money. So let me start at the top, the vision and leadership. First, we cannot deny that Europe has set out a transformative agenda with a broad vision across sectors, with social just transition written in alongside the Green Deal. It's leadership. And for that, Europe has to be recognized and praised for having that leadership. It's continued to hold that through the COVID crisis, and indeed recognize that every now and then a crack opens up in history and a moment opens up when you can make transformation happen. And the COVID crisis has to be one of those moments. And so to use the Green Deal as a vision for a green and just recovery from COVID is, again, strong, impressive leadership. When I read the texts, what I'm struck by, however, is the desire to hold together two quite different paradigms. There's the old paradigm of growth, and it's presented as a new growth strategy, but this is the shape of growth, right? Endless shoot, exponential growth, rising forever, going through the ceiling, up, up, up. And the notion that countries succeed by growing endlessly is a deeply rooted one. Deeply rooted, I say, almost 100 years. It's been around, the idea that economic success looks like endless GDP growth. And that's written into the strategy. But it also sits there with a much more holistic vision. I'm going to hold up the donut here. A much more holistic vision of thriving in balance. And that language, there's the idea of generative growth is put forward in the Green Deal. Now, to me, generative growth is trying to have the donut and endless growth at the same time. So these words need to be made to mean something. The commitment to planetary boundaries within some of the text is crucial because they begin to connect us to the laws of planet Earth and what makes this planet succeed. But how? Drive for growth and a recognition of planetary boundaries and a desire to be generative, how those are actually brought together in practice means everything. So let's go down to the next level of what this looks like when we hit the target and the strategy. First of all, let's start off looking at climate change. We have to recognize that 2050 is too slow, too late for the world's highest income, most ambitious, most historically responsible country to think that that is an adequate time by which to go net carbon zero. It does not live up to the science or to this moment in history. I find it quite bizarre, actually, and I'm not talking just about Europe now, but all high-income countries that think the idea for them to arrive at net zero by 2050, it's like saying we want to be the fastest in the race, but I'm willing to hit the finish line at the time of the last qualifier. It's completely inadequate, and we need much more ambition again by 2030, not 55%, more like 65% to show that transition is serious. Second, on circularity in the circular economy plan and decoupling. If Europe wants to marry living within planetary boundaries with economic growth, then decoupling is not just a nice to have, it's the essential, it's everything, it's the heart of the matter. Without it, nothing. So there are no adequate binding targets on decoupling being expressed in the circular economy plan. And that means that Europe does not have its eye on the strength of decoupling required if it really believes it's going to meet growth within planetary boundaries. So this has to be rectified. The decoupling, and I'm not just talking about relative decoupling or a little bit of absolute decoupling. I'm talking about sufficient absolute decoupling that brings down Europe's resource use, material footprint, speed and scale that's required. It's unprecedented. So this is a deeply transformative journey that needs targets and strategy to make it happen and to ensure that it's happening. Lastly, on targets and strategy, there's a real concern that Europe is ensuring its consumption is reduced and its environmental impacts are reduced within the area of Europe without having its eye on what's happening overseas. And I want to come to the question of agriculture, because although Europe's farm to fork strategy has some good progress on fertilizers and pesticides and organic and tree planting and protecting rivers, it doesn't have the equivalent eye ensuring that imports of agricultural produce are under stringent challenges as well to become far greened. Europe imports a fifth of its crops and 2/3 of its meat and dairy. And between 1990 and 2014, while Europe increased hectarage of forest by about 30 million hectares, at the same time, 11 million hectares were being deforested in countries like Brazil and Indonesia for food products that were imported into Europe. So it cannot be a swap of biodiversity here and loss there. We have to take a global and planetary perspective on environmental and agricultural impacts. So let me come down from targets and strategy now down to the bottom, which is to law and money, the legislation and the finance. And this is where the risk of hijack becomes very, very real. And this is where I have some serious alerts. So first of all, the Common Agricultural Policy, as we know, it was drawn up under a previous commission. It is not compatible or compliant with the Green Deal. So what's going to happen? If that Common Agricultural Policy goes through, that's proof at the first hurdle that this is a case of hijack. It has to be taken off the table and retabled as a proposition that is compatible with the vision and the ambition of the Green Deal. So we need that transformation. Second, on the Recovery and the Resilience Fund facility, it's important that a large percentage, around 37%, at least 37% of that money is dedicated to green investment projects, but it also has to be sure that none of that money goes into fossil fuels, and all of that money does no harm in accord with the principles of the Green Deal and the EU taxonomy. So how that money gets spent, what projects the member states put forward, what the Commission agrees to, and how that gets spent will be the first evidence of the Green Deal on the ground, in legislation and in impact. And then the last point I want to raise is about the binding nature of the Green Deal's ambition and commitment at the level of member states. Will member states adopt this? And what happens if they don't? What happens if they don't follow through on what Europe knows needs to happen? And I want to add that it's crucial that the design of business and finance is reshaped to make this possible. So Europe's Sustainable Finance Plan is really important to keep pushing ahead in the direction it's going. And then the Sustainable Corporate Governance Plan coming next year is very, very important to bring along business. I spend time talking with major companies that know they need to transform, but know that they need the transformative legislative framework in which they can make that move. So all of this needs to happen together. So let me go to the final image I want to share, and I want just to come back to the picture. Can I just see the slides as well, please? I would like to show the picture of where will Europe be in 2030. In 10 years' time, where will we be? I'm just about to turn 50 years old. So in 10 years' time, I'll be 60. My kids will have left home. I want you to think, where will you be in 10 years' time? What will have happened to this picture over these 10 years? Because where Europe's nations are and where Europe is as a whole and what the Green Deal turned out to be depends absolutely on the actions, the legislation, the finance, the choices that underpin the fine words right now. Who do we want to have been over this decade that's just beginning? This has been one hell of a start of it this year. Let us leave this year in the past and move forward in a far more transformative way. But who do we want to have been? Who do we want our jobs, our roles, the commissions that we're part of, the companies, institutions, the NGOs, the governments that we represent? Will we enable ourselves to look back in 10 years' time and say, yes, we actually turned that corner. We began to put those fine words, decades of fine words, we began to make them real. This agenda of the Green Deal has the capacity, has the potential in it to be harnessed for that future. It also, as I'm sure everybody in this webinar knows, it has a very clear potential to be hijacked by business as usual, Europe as usual, vested interests that have no vision about transformation. Let us make sure it turns the corner that needs to be turned, and that as Europe emerges from this emergency of COVID, it pursues the agenda and it pursues the future it already knew that we needed. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kate. That was inspirational. What we'll do now is we've got had a poll in the beginning. We'll have a series of questions, so get your questions in for Kate. And I'll kick off with a couple of myself while you're getting your questions in. Well, first of all, a quick comment. Thank you very much for the speech. We wanted a visionary, and you gave us a visionary, so thank you. We wanted a way into a safe operating space, and you gave us that as well. A couple of takeaways for me is you mentioned several times the sort of unparalleled ambition is needed. You also mentioned repeatedly the issue of that the program could be harnessed or hijacked. You mentioned this is a moment in history and we need to turn the corner. So, and you also mentioned the issue of just transition. So I've got two questions to kick off. One is, I mean, we in the environmental community focus, of course, on the green aspects of the Green Deal, but we try hard to make sure that the social dimension is fully integrated. You mentioned the just transition, so I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more what you think the Green Deal needs to do to ensure that the social dimension is adequately integrated.
Yeah, a lot of the transformation that needs to happen, let's just say in the space of energy and energy efficiency, investing in energy efficiency of households, insulating homes, insulating buildings. It is a retrofit job that needs to happen street upon street upon street upon street across Europe. And that is labor intensive, semi-skilled and skilled work. And that creates jobs in localities because it's work that has to be done everywhere. So it's a really clear example of a win-win for reskilling people, creating jobs that have purpose towards green transformation. And then on circularity, create a circular economy. This is an economy in which resources are not used up, they're used again and again, far more carefully, more collectively, more slowly, and more creatively. And again, that creates jobs in terms of material reuse, refurbishing, reprocessing, remanufacturing, and it creates jobs locally. It takes us away from these very extractive, globalized supply chains and creates a far more distributed, localized economy. But that needs investment to make sure that there is a circular program of materials reuse and these different levels. So I see a lot of potential for creating employment through circularity, through energy efficiency. And also, if we begin thinking about greening buildings and bringing greenery into cities, that's what the biomimicry thinker Janine Benyus would call high touch work, where material and greenery and trees and plants need care, they need maintenance. And that's a human connection with the living world in urban centers. So there are many different ways of creating jobs in this transformation. And I think it's crucial to focus on the new jobs that are being created. And of course, we've seen across the United States and across Europe now that the number of jobs in renewable and clean and efficiency and the green agenda are outstripping the old jobs left behind in the fossil fuel industry. So it's crucial to create those new jobs, but also to ensure a just transition for those who need reskilling, and to ensure that, as the European Green Deal itself says, no one is left behind, to ensure that this does not become a process of greater inequality. It absolutely need not be. Those investments need to be made to bring all communities along and to center opportunity in localities so that people aren't forced into large major industrial centers, but there is enterprise in rural, in towns and in villages so that people can work where they live and have that sense of local community. So I think there's huge opportunity to put the green agenda together with a far more transformative social agenda. And I'm so glad that it's written into the Green Deal. It has to therefore be made real at every step.
Okay, thank you very much. I've now got a question from the floor. Raoul Pop asks, we need member states to take a stronger climate leadership. How do we do that? So this is the issue of, at the moment, we've got at the European level a commitment which is being discussed of minus 55%, for at least minus 55 for 2030. How can we get the leadership in the member states on the climate? Because the more leadership in the member state, the easier it is to have a European ambition too.
Yes. So like you, I am searching for that. We are all searching. This is a big teamwork that many actors trying to bring about this transformation together. What I see is the pressure of Fridays for Future. I see in some countries pressure from Extinction Rebellion and from activists who have, some people say they've gone too far and they're too radical, but my goodness, they've pulled the window. They've pulled the window of what's normal and what can be expected, and they have moved governments and moved what's normal. And it's an undoubtedly essential force that's made positive change. So for me, it's the continual mobilization of Europe's citizens calling not for what seems feasible or practical or politically viable, but for what's necessary. And then it is leadership from within those states. In the work I'm doing, I'm as so many people also will see, it's the leadership of one that creates peer-to-peer inspiration for others. I think we're seeing Europe providing that leadership. Europe was the first region of countries to come out and say in law net zero by 2050, and we're seeing others, China, Japan, Korea. Let's see what the US does now. But also within Europe and the member states, when one member state steps up and actually sets a more ambitious target, as some have done, I believe this will provide inspiration for others to realize that 2050 is just far too slow and doesn't sit with the ambition and leadership that Europe holds.
Okay,
and sorry, let me add that. I'm not just talking about 2050, about 2030, that additional ambition. I mean, we will look back and realize that those who set higher ambitions for themselves in many ways made it easier for themselves, because once you set a high ambition, everybody knows that we're transforming. The message is clear, the information's out there, the signal is long, it's legal, and it's loud. Now let's just get going. When you set a less ambitious goal, a lot of energy from companies goes into lobbying. Can we be the ones who are the exception? Do we really have to try this hard? So actually a more ambitious goal sends a clearer, firmer signal and just actually makes it easier to make the transformation in the end.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd just like to build on that, and then I've got another question. But to build on that, you mentioned that we had China, we had Japan, we had Korea also committing to carbon neutrality, China for 2060, Korea and Japan last couple of weeks for 2050. Do you think there's space and opportunity for the EU to export its Green Deal model to other countries? Is there space for a global diplomacy?
I don't think Europe should try to export the Green Deal, because I don't think Europe would want to import a policy from somewhere else. I think policies and visions need to be from that place. But I think what Europe can do is provide the inspiration and the leadership and the pace that's needed. So I think whether it comes up by the name of Green Deal, doesn't matter whether something's called a Green Deal or not. What matters is that it has the vision of bringing humanity within planetary boundaries so that we protect the life-supporting systems of this planet, and that we do it in a way that's just for all of humanity. Whatever countries want to call that, when we see the policies, we will know whether or not they're aligned with that, and whether or not they're escaping that long draw of 20th century endless economic growth. That's a really dangerous trap to get caught in, thinking everything has to be framed as endless economic growth. We have much, much clearer metrics now of what human prosperity depends upon, and it depends upon the stability of a thriving planet. And we can measure that in the planet's own terms. So let's put that first, because without that, nothing. We destroy the living systems on which we depend. So I want to see other regions, countries, whether they're small or whether they're massive global players, they all provide inspiration of showing that paradigm change is possible. And it's possible not just in terms of civil society leadership, it's possible in terms of governmental leadership.
Okay, no, thanks very much. So Europe should lead by example, and also engage interestedly between different regions to look at the diversity of solutions as well, because maybe we can be inspired by successes. I've got now a question in terms of leading by example, and Sophie asks something on the Common Agricultural Policy. You yourself mentioned that the CAP is running counter the objectives of the Green Deal. So do you see either a need or an opportunity for the CAP to actually be taken off the table, for the Commission to withdraw it and put a new one which is Green Deal compatible on the table? At the moment, both the Parliament and Council are entering the trilogues, but with the proposals that are not ambitious enough. Should Europe have the courage to try again with the CAP?
So Europe has to have the courage to say, if we're going to come in with the first piece of legislation under President van der Leyen's Commission is the Green Deal, and it is the framing piece of legislation. She made it very clear that this was the umbrella under which everything would follow, and this has been the umbrella under which all of COVID has been managed. And then an old version of the Common Agricultural Policy negotiation is brought in, and it's not compatible with the new vision that's been set. This is the moment when push comes to shove. This is the moment when the rubber hits the road, when we find out where the vision actually follows through in action. So, of course, it has to be made compatible. Now, I'm not sitting on the inside of European processes, so it's not for me to say exactly how and in what process, but it's quite clear as somebody, a passionate friend of Europe, watching from the outside, who worked for many years on the Common Agricultural Policy in my role at Oxfam. this needs to change. Either transformation happens or it doesn't. Either we harness this moment for the future we want, or we get hijacked by the past. And we know that the Common Agricultural Policy has always had strong vested interests that have made it an outlier on European progressive policy. This is the moment to decide and show whether or not the Green Deal is Europe's vision, or whether it's going to be watered down and co-opted and eased off to make way for vested interests that are too strong to be changed.
Thank you very much. I've now got another question which builds on the CAP but goes further. But first of all, we can be pleased that we have a new proposed government in the States. But with that comes the prospect of maybe a trade deal, because CETA was off the table in the last presidency, but now it may come on the table. So you mentioned that the CAP contradicts the goal of the Green Deal, but what about big trade deals like the CETA or the EU-Mercosur? Can they be made compatible with in bringing the EU's economy into the donut? So what needs to be done?
So they do need to be made compatible. And I'm not going to dive into the details of those agreements and those trade possibilities, but just want to stand back and say trade has to be made compatible with the vision of our time. And the dangers of our international institutions, whether we have the WTO or the World Intellectual Property Organization or the World Bank or the IMF, we have these institutions, we can very quickly get caught in what's already going on in these institutions, and we can get caught into incremental processes of what seems feasible within the jargon, within the frameworks, within the references of a particular area of negotiation. And I want to invite us to stand back and say, we now know more. We know that we are destroying the life-supporting systems of our planet. We need to create governmental policies within nations and regions that are compatible with turning that around. And now we need to stand back and look at trade and ask ourselves, what kind of trading relationships between nations is compatible with life on a thriving planet? And let's not assume that we inherit the thinking, the jargon, the concepts from the past. We need to be bold in rethinking what thriving trade looks like, that respects lower income countries and recognizes the long history of power imbalance between nations in trade, and starts to change that. Because we don't thrive on one planet as 10 billion people, with one region always dominating over another. We have to enable everyone to live in the donut. So I absolutely would welcome a transformative thinking on trade.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got another question, or someone's phoning in or not? Oh, here's a question. This is very small. Okay, right, I have to read this out and sound like a whatever. Kate spoke about the importance of the EU to expend its sight on the impact of production of goods outside the EU and importing into the EU. I totally agree this situation is already happening on the EU level as more environmental ambitious member states are making use of less ambitious Eastern European member states for goods production. Don't you think the EU should take a bottom-up approach in the way of resolving the issue? Thank you. And that's from Ingrid Schulz of Europe Direct Bucharest.
So Ingrid, I'm not up on the details of the different member states and the positioning of production, so I can't comment specifically on that. But I think, of course, there's huge variation within the European member countries. And in fact, that was visible when I showed the 150 nations on the donut chart. You could see they were in quite different positions, some of them with far more social challenges than others. So, of course, there's a huge balancing conversation and adjustments within Europe as well as with the rest of the world. The reason I focused on that is because most countries, in fact, when they want to talk about greening, they want to talk about their own domestic production. And yet we know that huge volumes of consumption comes from overseas. And if we are taking a planetary perspective, then we have to take in our global consumption and our global ecological impact. It falls out of sight of governments so often, and it ends up offshoring the impacts. So, of course, there needs to be transformation within the relationships between countries within the EU, but we also need to make sure that the legislation and the targets take account of the global impacts of Europe. Otherwise, Europe preserves itself in a pristine state at the same time as running down the living planet in other nations. That makes no sense.
Okay, no, thanks very much. So the EU should not only be responsible domestically, but also shouldn't just simply rely on the policy, the legislation, and the safeguards in other countries, but actually keep its own. We should keep our own principles and standards even when engaging abroad. Okay, we've got a question here from Shailendra Singh. For developing countries, social indicator improvements delinked from business growth is indeed tough. Do you have some examples of where this has been done successfully? Furthermore, where is the finance to come from?
So let me check I understand the question. So social indicator improvements delinked from business growth. So first of all, you said developing countries. I'm not going to call them developing countries because I think we're all developing countries now. I'm guessing you're meaning lower income countries. So as you could see on the 150 nations that I showed, there were many countries, let's say Zambia, Bangladesh, India, that have massively falling short on meeting people's needs and have barely overshot any planetary boundaries. Those nations need what we call economic growth. For sure, they need to see an increase in their incomes so that they can invest in people's health and education and transport and housing and jobs and opportunity. So absolutely, we need growth in those nations. I just want to use my hosepipe here again, because I said the shape of growth is shown like this, but actually in nature, things grow like this. Growth is an S curve. And lower income nations, I'm going to use my nose as a third finger, and lower income nations are coming up this curve and need economic growth, but need to do it in a way that has not been done before, because they can't do it with the same degenerative fossil fueled economies that high income nations have. The countries I'm talking about when I'm challenging the question on growth are the countries that are up here on the curve, that have had growth, have very high incomes compared to the rest of the world. They cannot expect to grow forever. They need to find ways to grow and then mature and have a post-growth economy that comes to thrive without depending upon endless growth. And that's a completely different kind of challenge. So those lower income countries that you were talking about, yes, they need growth and they need investment from companies that are respecting the fact that they cannot go to those nations and degenerate the landscapes in order to make their profits. They need to create regenerative designs and distributive designs. And that's why we need to transform business at the same time.
Okay, thanks very much. So that's basically well-being is possible in a post-growth world, and it's good to have the inspiration from the nature and the planet of growth, different growth systems. I think we've got a call in now for a question. I think is it coming through? Voila. Bernhard, over to you.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm Bernhard from the EU Umweltbüro, and first of all, thank you very much, Kate, for this very inspirational start in the morning, as always, very much enjoying. And I have a follow-up question on, so you mentioned a term very often used is the decoupling, but another one is the regenerative economy, and we find it in the latest version of the Environmental Action Program. And what do you see as a specific policy needs to encourage a regenerative economy? This would be my question to you.
Oh, great question. So I don't know what Europe means when it uses the word regenerative, because I see the phrase regenerative growth, and that makes me think someone's trying to take two paradigms and just really, really hopes that they look good when they sit next to each other. But it's not quite clear what they mean. So I would really like to hear Europe explain and give examples of regenerative growth. Regenerative design starts by recognizing that we live on a planet with cycles. And again, I can use the donut here. We have a carbon cycle. We have hydrological cycles of fresh water. And we need to find ways of working with and within the cycles of the living world. The air's ability to cleanse itself of pollutants, for example, and the cycles of life itself, the ability of a forest to regenerate, the ability of a shoal of fish to regenerate. So regenerative economies are economies that work with and within the cycles of the living world. They don't run down these cycles of life. They work within them. They harvest trees no faster than they grow. They harvest fish no faster than the shoal can replenish itself. It's a very different model from the extractive model of enterprise and industry that the 20th century was built upon. And so it means starting by recognizing that we have degenerated Earth's living systems, and we need to start by restoring them. We need to replenish the soils. We need to rewild much of the landscape. We need to sequester carbon in soil and in the landscape. So first, restore and replenish, and then sustain at a rate that is regenerative. And that's not how business has been done before. So it's a new vision of humanity coming home and belonging within the living world. And of course, I believe it needs to be, at the same time as being regenerative, it needs to be distributive, because another favorite toy, 20th century economies concentrated resources in few hands. We have major shareholding corporations that concentrate the value of company activity in the hands of its shareholders, who are a tiny fraction of all people. And actually, we need, instead of centralizing design, we need distributive design that recognizes that life is a network, it's an ecosystem, and ecosystems thrive when resources are distributed equitably throughout them. And so we need to create economies that are far more distributive of opportunity and distributive of value. So for me, a regenerative and distributive economy has to be what brings us into the donut that meets the needs of all within the needs of the planet. Now, I would absolutely love to see examples of regenerative agriculture in Europe, agriculture that is sequestering carbon in the soil, examples of regenerative enterprises that are helping to create renewable energy systems and getting rid of fossil fuels, but also of regenerating communities and that are distributive of that value. That vision is, to me, the vision of what the future economy needs to look like. Let's make it real in Europe, and let's find examples of policies and companies and regions and cities that are making it happen. We're working at the Donut Economics Action Lab. We're working very closely with the city of Amsterdam, who've taken the concept of the donut and saying we're going to use this as a vision for the future of our city and our emergence from the COVID crisis. And because they've committed to having no fossil fuel transport in the city by 2030, 100% circular economy by 2050. They're replanning the spatial layout of the city around the design of the donut. They are embodying it at the heart of their city. And it's not easy. It's not easy to say we're going to become a regenerative place, but this is the 21st century journey that we have to go on.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think it's very interesting, the regenerative journey, and you underline that we need to work within context. And basically, in some areas, we've had a sort of ecosystem approach.
I think we would welcome a transformative thinking on trade.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've seen that an ecosystem-based approach is a good way forward, and nature restoration and nature-based solutions are a good part of the regenerative model. We had a poll in the beginning. I'd like to quickly share the poll, but to remind all of you what the questions were, we asked in the poll is, what do you think about the European Green Deal as it stands now? Does it bring about system change? Does it bring about important new strategies, action plans and laws, but not systemic change? Does it bring progress, but only a bit better than business as usual? Or are they have objectives that sound good on paper, but will not be realized? And the results we have at the moment is that the majority of people think the second one, it's important, has new strategies, action plans and laws, but is not yet a driver of systemic change. A few people did say it is, it does bring about, and a few other people on the other side said it's good on paper, but won't be realized. Okay, and some people think it's only a bit better than business as usual. So this is in some ways a challenge, which then creates a platform for future, this next speakers, is how can they address that? Because if you look on the tin, it does say system change. So how can we make sure what's in the tin is actually what's on the tin? And that's the big challenge. I don't know if you maybe wish to bring out a little bit more about your talks about harnessing and hijacking, because I thought that was interesting. You spent a long time on hijacking. Maybe we could have a couple of sentences on harnessing, because ultimately we want to realize all these opportunities. So what is the best way to basically harness the opportunities so that we get, when we do this questionnaire again, that we actually have a higher level?
Great. So I think the best way to harness the opportunity is when leaders just have the guts to go for it. They just say, despite my political intuition that tells me this is too daring, this is too bold, we're going to do it. We're going to actually make this legislation happen. We're going to put these plans into action. Because when you get to the other side of that decision, a clarity happens, that a new energy is released, and the new possibilities start to be made visible. So first of all, I think to harness that agenda, just let's have the guts to do this. because we know we've been trying for decades and decades. And like I said right at the beginning, sometimes a moment opens up a crack in history, and COVID creates that crack, and the climate crisis really creates that crack, and Fridays for Future marches create that crack. And if we don't jump on it and move with it, it's gone. So first of all, harness it by having the courage to move. Secondly, though, once you start moving finance in this direction, you unlock the possibilities of the new economy that's been waiting to be created. And that has all sorts of knock-on effects, positive knock-on effects that inspire others, create the new ecosystem. Things become possible. So it's much, much easier to show transformation once it begins, rather than to sit talking about it before it's begun. So just the earlier we start, the faster it will move, the more those positive co-benefits and knock-on effects come through. So, and then lastly, I do believe there is a genuine desire to harness and transform in so many people. The people I meet working in the Commission, the people who are very senior in the Commission, people in the NGO community, people in business, there are people desiring transformation everywhere, finding themselves, though, locked in systems and frameworks and silos and institutions and a language and a baggage and historical norms that hold us back. And there just are moments when you have to say, we are not going to be held by that. We want to be able to look back, whether in a decade or whether at the end of our own lives, and say, I was part of making a transformation that I knew the world needed. And we did it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're very coming close to the very end. I like the comment on courage. Maybe we've got time for one very last question. This is from Diego Marin. The energy transition requires billions of tons of raw materials and metals and minerals. How do we make sure we stay within planetary boundaries while simultaneously moving away from fossil fuels?
That's an excellent question, because there's a real danger that people think, oh, I'll just get rid of my fossil fuel car and get an electric car and all will be well in the world. When actually, as this question says, it requires materials and metals and lithium and mining and all sorts of issues. So yes, that energy transition requires new metals and materials and mining, and that needs to be done with a very, very strong eye on social justice around those communities that live where those lithium mines are and are suddenly finding themselves at the center of the world's attention. We also need to ensure we bring circularity in, so that we don't have this linear stream of material, but begin to use and reuse the materials and metals from the past. But also, of course, we need to power down the excessive energy demand that so many households and communities and cities and nations already have. So it's not just saying our demands are as they are, let's just substitute them with a different way of meeting their energy needs. We need to transform how we travel, how we eat, how we heat our homes. We need to reduce our impact on this planet so that we have the chance of living within those planetary boundaries.
Okay, thank you very, very much. We're now coming to the close. I think that was fascinating. And I think that we'll look again at the reports, the paper we've done looking at the Green Deal, what it's done and what it needs to do. And in light of that conversation, we'll sort of look again at what we have in terms of the way forward. There's a lot of terms and issues that you've raised. The just transition is, of course, core to what we do, but your redistributive value linked with regenerative economy was particularly interesting. The dangers of hijacking versus harnessing, and that we're basically in a moment in history where we need to turn the corner. And I liked what you said in the end. It's not just about having the guts, but it's also, once it starts happening, once the finance starts flowing, you actually get a positive feedback loop. People see the success, people engage with other people who can, historically were separate, but we can work together, and maybe we can move towards making sure that the Green Deal is not just a semantic change, but basically a true system change. So thank you very, very much for that, Kate. I thought that was brilliant. And now hopefully all the audience will have thought it's brilliant. And for those who haven't seen it, we're recording this so that you can admire the discussion afterwards. So now I'd just like to close this session, if I can find the right piece of paper, which I can't find.
Well, I'll say, while you're looking for it, I'll say thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you. As I said, as a UK citizen now on the outside of this process, and really regretting my country not being one of the red dots in the graph that I showed. I really look to Europe for that leadership, and really admire and want to salute the leadership that a region of countries with many differences between them can show, and can move the world, and keep doing it.
Okay, Thank you very much. That was excellent. So just now we're going to have a questions and answer session for the Commissioner is open, as well as the survey questions. So the next session will be with Virginijus Sinkevicius, the Commissioner, discussing with Jeremy Waits, our Secretary General. There should be, if you look on the home space, you should find a second poll looking at what you find as the most promising elements of the European Green Deal. What do you find that really offers hope that it's systemic change rather than semantic change? And also, there's, yes, and you'll start putting in your questions now, because what we do is we gather all the questions, the ones with the most likes and so on, we then take forward for the next moderator. And now we'll have a small break of 15 minutes, so please start again at exactly 10:15 and prepare your questions and your poll answers in the meantime. And for the moment, thank you very much. And again, a great, huge thanks to Kate. I thought that was very, very interesting. And maybe we'll put the donut in the Green Deal. Okay.
Thanks very much for having me in part of the day.
Welcome back to the EB's 2020 Annual Conference. Today we're here to discuss with you how we can emerge from the pandemic to an even stronger European Green Deal and how we can secure Europe's environmental leadership. We're exchanging our opinions about how the deal can accelerate the transition towards true sustainability in the face of one of the most challenging social and economic crises of our times. I hope you've already been with us this morning to follow Kate Raworth's inspiring keynote speech. You have seen the poll. More than half of you in the audience believe that the European Green Deal as it stands now brings about important policy changes, has presented important strategies, but it's not yet transformative. So Kate's message was very clear. She said that we need unprecedented ambition. We need courage from the political leadership. And she also made it very clear that we need to close the gaps between the commitments and policies that contradict these commitments, such as the CAP or the EU's trade policies. So before we start with the second session, let me remind you that you can use the Q&A box to ask your questions to the Commissioner. So start right now to put your questions down. And also share your thoughts with us on Twitter, #EB20. Now I'll hand over to our Secretary General, Jeremy Waits, who is going to sit down virtually with the Environment Commissioner, Virginijus Sinkevicius, to discuss the EU's environmental leadership in his first year of office. Jeremy.
Thank you, Patricia, and good morning to everyone, and welcome also from me to our conference today. We're delighted to welcome Environment Commissioner Sinkevicius to this conference. Commissioner, you follow in a long line of Environment Commissioners, but I think it's fair to say that you are the first Environment Commissioner whose portfolio has been recognised as the first of 6 priorities, as Ursula von der Leyen put it. And so the expectations are very high, no pressure. If we see the European Green Deal as the flagship policy of this Commission on which its success and or failure will be judged, you and the Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans are in fact the flag bearers. So we're really delighted to have you with us today. And I'd like to start off with a rather general question. As you look back on your first year, almost first year in office, what do you feel were the greatest achievements of the Commission? And of these, which were the hardest to win? And where were your biggest disappointments in this first year? It seems that we're having trouble with the connection to the Commissioner.
Morning. I'm very sorry, but I see that we have some problems with the connections. I'm keep on trying to reconnect and so on. Jeremy, I didn't hear the last bit of your question. I lost you from the part where you said that the expectations are high. If you could please repeat the last bit of your question, I would do utmost to answer it.
Sure, yeah. I was asking you, as you look back on almost a full year in office, where do you feel that your greatest achievements were? And which were the hardest to win, the ones where the outcome was not a foregone conclusion? And also the other side, where were your greatest disappointments in this first year? Did you hear me that time or no? It seems like once again we're having problems with the connection. It's a pity. We had originally conceived of the Commissioner being together with us in the studio here, And the latest tightening of the Belgian lockdown rules put a paid to that, unfortunately. So that's why we're having to do this with a remote connection, which at this moment is letting us down. It's quite a challenge working in this COVID world.
Yes, Jeremy. I mean, I don't know how we're going to continue. Unfortunately, the connection doesn't work well, but at least I could hear your question. Once again, please accept my apologies regarding the poor connection. But speaking, first of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation today, all the good work you do. The EEB isn't always easy on us, but I appreciate that. And I'm usually more interested in what happened next. But of course, there is a lot to take away from this first year as well. First of all, we live in times of crisis. Human beings tend to go back to old solutions, to business as usual. And I'm very proud that here in Europe, we did the opposite. Despite the dramatic situation, we kept our compass set on building a future, a better future. As President von der Leyen said in her State of the Union speech, the pandemic showed the limits of a model that values well-being. It reminded us of our fragility and the fragility of our environment, with glaciers that are melting, forests that are burning, and crops disappearing because of droughts. Climate change, biodiversity loss, natural resources depletion, and pollution are interrelated and interdependent. And the only solution is to tackle them in an integrated way. We have just listened to Kate Raworth, author of the famous donut, and I agree with her fundamental message. We are out of balance.
Seems like once again we've lost the commissioner. I understand the problem is at their end.
Am I back again?
You're back. Your voice is back anyway.
Yes.
You're back.
At which point you lost me, if you could say?
You were just referring back to Kate Raworth's presentation earlier this morning, and saying that you just started to speak about that.
That's quite well. That's quite well. So absolutely, I agree with her fundamental message. So we are out of balance. And policymakers should use one single test for a policy. They should ask if it's ambitious enough to keep us inside planetary boundaries. we have a decade to change the current trends and deliver a systemic change. I come back to your question. Certainly, the EU Green Deal is a key step to start changing the trends. The fact that its objectives are underpinning the EU recovery plan endorsed last July by the European leaders is a major political achievement. It is a unique and real opportunity to make a paradigm shift and move towards a sustainable, carbon neutral, and of course inclusive and regenerative economic model. We have committed to become carbon neutral by 2050 and are discussing more ambitious climate targets by 2030. We are committed to address biodiversity loss through the biodiversity strategy and farm to fork. I'm proud that these strategies are, yes, ambitious, but yet achievable. And more people we have on board. We are tackling, of course, resource depletion through the Circular Economy Action Plan, the move towards regenerative economy that gives back more to the nature than it takes is the path to take climate change and environmental degradation. And of course, minimizing pollution and enrich our natural capital. I think it's a huge transition. It's big transition. It's a huge opportunity, but of course it's a massive challenge as well. And that's why we are working on solutions with a place for everyone, where no one is left behind. Of course, it won't be easy, but like I said, we might not have a second chance. And at this moment, with recovery and resilience plans, we have a unique chance. We have a unique chance to build back better and help those who are in need of technical, of financial help to get on track of the Green Deal and foster the implementation of the Green Deal.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that. And I'm very happy that you were able to listen to Kate Raworth's introduction, her comments earlier. And I think one of the things you will have heard there is that she made a very clear distinction between the vision and leadership behind the European Green Deal, the targets, and the legislation of finance that need to follow and deliver. And she was very full of praise for the first, more critical of the second, and the climate targets, climate neutrality by 2050, minus 55 net, not ambitious. But perhaps the biggest concerns over legislation of finance. So my question to you is, how do you get from that vision, which I think many of us would agree is a very, very positive vision, and it's really been refreshing to have a Commission President coming in with that commitment. But how do you get from there to actually delivering on the ground? Is it mainly the legislation? Is it mainly the finance? Is it a problem with policy coherence? Is it about implementation and enforcement of existing legislation? I mean, probably it's a bit about all of those things, but which do you see as where the biggest challenges are?
No, that's a little bit of everything. You can't exclude one bit, of course. Addressing legislation gaps is important. Implementing properly legislation is crucial. But that cannot be done, and some of the targets cannot be achieved without a proper funding. I always say, also as a former minister of economy, usually countries, member states put the priorities. You can see the real priorities where the money are actually put, and that's crucial for implementation. But last but not least, what is crucial, of course, is society support. As we speaking about the transition, which is upon many sectors, and it cannot be done without society support, without having everyone on board, having with us, without, of course, us offering them a possibilities, a something better in exchange, something clearly better in exchange, and this is far overarching through whole Europe, from youth unemployment, let's say, in a south problem, to mining, coal mines in certain regions in Central Europe. So We have a huge puzzle to solve. I'm happy we have a solution for that. And speaking, of course, mainly the Green Deal, but speaking about the money, I think what's most important that looking at the recovery and resilience plans in their national recovery and resilience plans, we are asking member states to meet the 37% climate spending target. At the same time, the national recovery and resilience plans needs to comply with the do no significant harm principle and to make sure that they observe the environmental adequacy. So these plans must be fully coherent with other plans to be prepared under EU law, such as the European semester, the national energy and climate plans, the just transition plans. So this governance structure will help us ensure that the next generation EU budget is a driver of truly transformational change that underpins a truly green recovery. So, of course, it means that Commission will be studying the submissions of national plans very carefully. My services, my cabinet, and myself will also be closely associated to these national plans, and that's why we are making the case now while being drawn up. Some member states already submitted first draft and received very quick responses from Commission. But very clearly, we want to see public expenditure supporting the green transition, including through the green public procurement, green budgeting, carbon pricing, and of course, environmental taxation with lower taxes on labor and more incentive for companies to avoid harming the environment. So it is not just about making the right investments. It's also about structural reforms at national level, putting a price on unsustainable resource use and applying the polluter pays principle with a view to ending subsidies that end up harming the environment. And that will help us to have everything on board. You're going to have EU legislation properly implemented, because otherwise it will cost you. Secondly, of course, you offer the opportunities for people, and you get them on board.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think people will take reassurance from your comments about, how the Commission is going to look seriously about not only that the 37% of the Recovery and Resilience funding is spent in support of the European Green Deal objectives, but that the other, whatever it is 63%, is also spent in a way that does no harm. So I think that's very important. And I think it wasn't a foregone conclusion that the European Green Deal wouldn't be sidelined by the pandemic. And I think I at least appreciate the resilience of that concept within the Commission and among leaders. But of course, the devil is very much in the detail. And I think it will be a concern to see that we don't see funding going into, for example, fossil fuels, because that has been happening up to now. So I think, I think I'm very happy you're saying you're going to scrutinise that, but we will also scrutinise it, or into, for example, non-green hydrogen. But I'd like to move on to another topic. We lost a little bit of time at the beginning, so I'd like to push on to another topic and talk about agriculture, because, as you know, NGOs have generally welcomed the 2030 biodiversity strategy as one of the good products of the European Green Deal so far. We now want to see that it's well funded, that it's well implemented. But as you know very well, agriculture is the single biggest driver of biodiversity loss in the EU. And there is huge disappointment at the direction that the CAP negotiations have gone in. We heard Kate Raworth saying that actually the credibility of the European Green Deal now hangs on this, and echoing calls from many NGOs, including the EB, to withdraw the CAP proposal. This was a proposal that was developed under the Juncker Commission. It was not designed to be European Green Deal compatible, and it's not. So we think there's a strong argument for it to be withdrawn. So my straight question to you is, will the Commission be willing to withdraw the proposal as called for by many NGOs and present a new proposal? And if you're not, how do you see the way forward to address the biodiversity crisis, but not only the biodiversity crisis, because the CAP is also very relevant to the climate crisis. And if agriculture is going to pull its weight in relation to climate, it's very hard to see how that's going to happen on the basis of where the current negotiations are going. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. I'm happy that we finally have a good connection and we can have a nice exchange. I'm very proud, first of all, of the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 because it's ambitious and comprehensive. It addresses all the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and it proposes concrete actions and commitments. Even before we presented it, we knew it was only the beginning. Change will only happen if it gets implemented properly. So that was always going to be the big task for the next few years. And we know we are asking for a lot, and some people are clearly frightened by that. We need to significantly reduce the footprint of our agricultural systems inside and outside the EU. In fact, our assessments show we need to halve our footprint to return to a level of impact that is within planetary boundaries. That's why we need to aim for a cap with strong environmental and climate ambition. And we are doing it not because we are a bunch of sort of green hippies. We are doing it to also help the farmers and to consolidate the future of EU agriculture, because they are first victims in the line. It's the only sure path to safeguarding the economic, environmental, and social benefits for farmers and citizens for the short and long term. And when we're speaking, I was asked multiple times regarding the food security. This is the threat for our food security. Losing harvest, this is the threat to our food security. Losing pollinators and what nature does, we cannot replace that system anyhow. This is the biggest threat. So both Council and the European Parliament have finalized and adopted their position on the CAP reform. This was a necessary step enabling two co-legislators to start negotiations with a view to reaching an agreement between co-legislators. But the positions that were adopted a few weeks ago is only a starting point. Some elements of the co-legislators' positions are not necessarily at the level of environmental ambition of the Green Deal. I think notably about the positions with regard to conditionality that was included in the Commission's proposal with the aim to link direct payments and certain rural development measures to an implementation of a range of climate, diversity, and animal welfare standards. And of course, we need to remember that the success and ambition of the CAP depends on the quality of national CAP strategic plans. They provide opportunities for flexibility and high ambition at national level. And we are already engaged in a structured dialogue with the member states to ensure they make best use of this opportunity. And as I said at the beginning, I very much welcome the efforts of the EEB in this area. You are doing a very important job in raising awareness of the importance of the CAP and of everything at stake here. And thank you very much for that. I think while the positions are so far quite apart now, there is a room for negotiations. So I would say that we go into trilogues and we aim for very ambitious agreement, which is, I think, within the possibility of reaching. And of course, Commission is going to be very much pushing for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with that is that you're entering the trilogues in a situation where none of the three positions on the table, the Commission's original proposal or the positions of the Parliament and the Member States, are satisfactory. And, you know, there's a kind of centre of gravity principle, which means that you end up somewhere in the middle of those three positions. And that's not a good place to be. And it's not a European Green Deal compatible place to be. So that's why, you know, I think there is this demand to withdraw the proposal, but I take it from your response that you can't tell us that that's what the Commission's going to do. You've mentioned the national CAP strategic plans, and that's indeed another avenue to pursue. Do you see the Zero Pollution Action Plan, which is in preparation now? I think it's due to come out in Q2 of 2021. Do you see that as a possible avenue for tackling agriculture, and we're not saying this to let you off the pressure in terms of withdrawing the CAP proposal, because we think that needs to be done anyway. But could you see, I mean, I will just say in passing that we're very happy with the chemical strategy for sustainability as the first kind of big element of this zero pollution ambition. But you now have this action plan coming in, which can address water, air and soil. So is there some potential for tackling agriculture's footprint through that instrument?
Maybe a couple of words on a CAP. I think there is, we shouldn't be jumping into any conclusion yet. As I said, there is a possibility for ambitious negotiations and aligning CAP with the Green Deal, with the ambition of biodiversity, with the ambition of, yes, you're right in saying that all the strategies we are adopting under the European Green Deal, they are interconnected. Whether it's a circular economy action plan or a chemical strategy or biodiversity strategy, they are all interconnected and aiming for the main goal of the Green Deal. And yes, of course, zero pollution ambition is going to be part of this big picture. The first step was done, of course, with the chemical strategy, and it is important to remember, of course, why we are doing this in the first place, because there is an urgent need for action, and we had a recent confirmation of that from the EEA, Healthy Environment, Healthy Lives report. There are also huge differences and inequalities to be addressed, and of course, a toxic-free environment is crucial for protecting nature, but also citizens. We need to do a much better job at monitoring, reporting, preventing, and remediating pollution from air, water, soil, definitely noise, and consumer products. And that means taking a systemic look at all our policies and regulations from the angle of zero pollution. The plan is to build on and complement actions we are already taking to achieve the zero pollution ambition. I'm thinking of pollution-related elements. Again, farm to fork as one of these strategies, let's say, but I've mentioned others before. And when we talk about zero pollution, we're also talking about actions that make a significant contribution to our ambitions for the climate and circular economy. It really will be a harmonized approach in the spirit of the Green Deal. In practical terms, we have published the roadmap for the action plan and are now in the public consultation phase, and we will be launching the online public consultation very soon. You know our procedures. The preparatory work is very thorough with evaluations and impact assessments when they are needed for dedicated initiatives. And of course, as always, I call on you and who are watching and join us today. We will be very happy to receive your inputs and ideas now or in writing, both, of course, I hope, and definitely remain within our constructive dialogue.
Thank you. Yeah. Listening to your second round of comments on the CAP, if I was listening to you correctly, I think you didn't rule out the possibility of the Commission withdrawing the proposal if the trilogue discussions don't go in the right direction. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. We're certainly very interested in the zero pollution action plan, especially if it results further down the line in some legally binding measures to address those areas. I'd like to move to another topic now. One of the files that you inherited, some might call it a poisoned chalice, was concerning the Orrhus Convention. And as you know, the EU has for a long time, in fact more or less forever, been in non-compliance with the Orrhus Convention because of the inadequate possibilities for access to justice at the level of the EU institutions. There are problems at the member state levels, but that's something different. And the Commission was really vigorously opposing the measures to correct this until recently, And last month we had the Commission's proposal to resolve this problem. And I must say we're very happy with one aspect of the Commission proposal. It does address the single biggest obstacle to NGOs being able to go to court, which is, I don't want to get too technical here, but it was the measures that could be challenged were limited to measures of individual scope, and most measures that NGOs wanted to challenge were measures of general scope. But there are other very serious obstacles to access to justice. Just as one example, state aid decisions. Under the Commission's proposal, there won't be a possibility to challenge that. Member states will be able to challenge it, and but not civil society. And this is these decisions are hugely significant. They can decide whether the fossil economy is being supported by a member state or not. And so I just want to know, I mean, obviously you will start by defending the Commission proposal. That's normal in the forthcoming co-decision process. But I want to know if you would be open, if the other institutions come forward with improvements like that, will the Commission be open to accepting them?
Thank you, Jeremy, for your question. First of all, let me return briefly to CAP so that I wouldn't be misquoted and that wouldn't have an impact on negative impact on upcoming trial. So Commission President in her written answer stated very clearly, Commission is not considering withdrawing CAP, and we are going to speak, negotiate with the co-legislators. Ambition CAP within the Green Deal ambition and within our plans, our core plans for the future, 2030 and 2050 plans. Now, returning to your question on Orrhus Convention, I'm of course very glad about your positive feedback on some of the parts on our recent proposals. Citizens and NGOs play an absolutely vital role in shaping and of course implementing our policies. And I'm happy that we were able to deliver, to make a step further. On state aid decisions, it is actually the Aarhus regulation itself that provides an exception for public bodies acting, performing, and administrative review functions. And this exception, which applies to the Commission, amongst others, when reviewing state aid decisions, takes into consideration the fact that such decisions are national. The Commission's decisions in such cases have to comply with EU environmental rules. At the same and the same goes for, of course, the member states' aids, but such decisions can and should be challenged at national. The problem must be tackled at the source. On your concerns relating to implementing measures, decisions requiring implementing measures are not altogether excluded from the scope of the proposal. It is only those specific provisions that requires national implementing measures that are accepted, and only temporary until such measures are adopted. Where implementing measures are taken at EU level, the decisions requiring such implementing measures and those implementing measures will be subject to administrative review under the new proposal. So very technical, I know, but probably it needs further explanation. So probably important to mention that on the other hand, where the implementing measures are national, it is normal that they should be challenged in national courts. And there is always a possibility for these cases to be referred to the Court of Justice for a preliminary ruling. So ultimately, the EU level decisions can be challenged as well. We are well aware of the many remaining obstacles to access to justice in member states, and the Commission has already taken action to ensure that redress at national level is as effective as possible within the limits of course, its competences as defined in the treaty. And we will continue to do so, acting according to the four priorities we have identified in the communication adopted together with the legislative proposal to set such obstacles aside. It has adopted together with the new Aarhus regulation, a communication about what needs to be done to set such obstacles aside. So the Commission straight away commits itself to take measures to help member states to comply with their obligations, such as training, information sharing, capacity building, and of course, when necessary, it is also we also prepared to enforce these obligations.
Can I just say I'm really delighted the extent you've engaged in this topic, and there's a serious danger here of me following down that road and getting into a more detailed discussion on it, because as many people know, I tend to talk far too much about the Orrhus Convention, but I'd love to take that up with you in another conversation. But for now, I think it's important to move on to a question about the sort of wider geopolitics and to what extent you see that as either helping or hindering the European Green Deal. Obviously, the last few days we've had this Biden victory, and the prospect of a climate-denying president being evicted for the White House has come a little bit nearer. So that's obviously positive, though as Kate Raworth has pointed out, we shouldn't take it for granted that that's necessarily going to be in plain sailing. But also there's the prospect of Brexit coming up, and the risk, I think a very real risk, of a semi-deregulated United Kingdom post-Brexit acting as a drag on the ambition of the environmental ambition of the EU. Do you see that as a threat, and what do you see as the solutions?
Thank you. Absolutely important part to touch upon, realizing that, of course, EU on its own cannot take this challenge, but definitely we can lead the way, and I'm happy we're doing so. The European Green Deal also, it recognizes that Europe can't deal with these issues like climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, pollutions, and of course the ocean challenges on its own. We need a global dimension to our policies, and there is an obvious need to engage closely with all our partners. For the EU trade policy, that means, of course, ensuring that the Green Deal components, including its sustainability, are always at the front of our minds. Trade policy must actively support and be part of the ecological transition. And this is what we were talking about, to really understand and real, for sure. Everyone who is watching knows it, but just what sort of big of a challenge it is. It's not sort of environmental or climate portfolio challenge. It's so much overarching. So trade policy is key when we're speaking about our foreign partners. As I think we can use our market leverage to promote an ambitious environmental agenda around the world, systematically, of course, including key obligations on climate and environmental in our trade agreements. Of course, we're also taking a holistic approach to sustainability across all chapters of our free trade agreement, notably on regulatory cooperation, public procurement, trade in goods, agriculture, of course, energy, financial sector, raw materials, and probably so on, including even intellectual property rights. When we do that, we will really manage to make a difference. And I think it is important to offer incentives to encourage third countries to make the green transition as well. And we must push our partners to be as ambitious as we are, especially when it comes to protecting the world's forests, stopping the illegal wildlife trade, and of course, fighting pollution. And I'm happy that, when in December, this commission, when stepped into office, the first delivery was actually the Green Deal. And we were, let's say, one of the first countries we were one of the first to very clearly state about our decarbonization to 50. And now we see more and more joining us. I'm happy about Japan, about South Korea announcement. We have and probably a lot people already forgot, but Australia and New Zealand are there for a while now. China with their 2060 ambition. And now we have a result with, of course, with the United States with completely different approach. Joe Biden stated that it's going to be one of the first things he's going to do. That he returns to Paris Agreement on one of the first days when he's in office. Of course, we're all going to be closely watching it. After that, I texted straight away with John Kerry, who actually signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, that there is a lot of work ahead of us, and we're ready to take on this challenge with a partner, a reliable partner like the United States, but also other countries. And we all looking forward for CBD 15 in Kunming in China.
I hate to butt in, but we're running a bit over time. We started late, and so we're going deliberately a bit over time, but we will need to wrap up soon. And I really hate to interrupt, because what you're saying now is extremely interesting, and I think very, great material for a longer discussion. But we do need to wrap up in a few minutes. So I'd just like to put a final question to you, and if you can answer in a minute or so. You spoke earlier about what did you say? You said the EB is not always easy on us. And I take that as a kind of a compliment, because we like to praise you when you do things well. We like to be critical when you're not. And we think that's the basis of a good relationship here. But what do you think that not just the EB, but the wider environmental movement could do better to achieve our objectives? As someone sitting inside, the Berlaymont, in the heart of the decision-making process, how could the environmental movement be more effective, in your view?
I think now, of course, it's very hard to assess sort of what happened in the past year, because we've been quite busy tackling the pandemic. But I think first of all, you should be very proud of what you have already achieved, because our plan of full decarbonization 2050, the Green Deal, is a fruit, first of all, of your work. I mean, the NGOs, of course, together with those people who were there on the streets every Friday, speaking for their future, speaking for the future they want, and of course the politicians reacted to that call. Nevertheless, the challenge is huge, and we should not take anything for granted. There is so many challenges and such a long way to go ahead, where we will need to unite our powers, where we most likely need your checks and balances constantly, and we will definitely keep a fruitful dialogue. And I hope we will be able, like this conversation today, to listen to each other and give quite clear answers to each other by going ahead. But my probably a wish for the very, very end, not to exclude and forget the biodiversity. You managed to do, and of course with the climate change, a buzzing word, but we tend to forget about all the other pieces that are important. And here probably comes biodiversity with everything related to it. We need to step up that action much more on the biodiversity. I think we need to show society what are the benefits of biodiversity and what are the losses, which are very obvious. Because sometimes I think this gets quite lost in the discussion, and discussion then spins quite a lot around climate change, not really looking further down the path. We have a very ambitious biodiversity strategy. It's achievable with clear benefits, with very clear benefits to society. It's not only about environment. It's basically about us being part of this planet. So I think it would be shame if we wouldn't manage to implement it. And of course, there we will need your help, sometimes maybe push.
Yes, thank you very much. And that's a very good point to end on. I mean, this was supposed to be, the Paris, this year was meant to be the Paris moment for biodiversity. That's obviously postponed, but hopefully that will arrive. And I want to thank you belatedly for your clarification on CAP. Although I would have preferred you clarified it in the opposite way, but at least you did make the position clear now. So thank you very much, Commissioner, for joining us today. It's been really great to have to hear your thoughts and your perspectives. And you can count on us as a strong ally, sometimes a critical one, in the 4 years ahead of your mandate, and we wish you luck in that period. And with that, I thank you and I hand back to Patrizia.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Commissioner, for this interesting dialogue this morning about where we stand with the rollout of the European Green Deal. And thank you to all of us for staying with us despite the initial problems that luckily got solved. And thank you for the extra 5 minutes you gave us to make up for the time lost this morning with the Commissioner. So we'll have a break now, and we'll be right back at 11:15 with the third and final session, the panel discussion. So we'll see you in a little bit more than 10 minutes.